profit.
Well, yeah. Well, all I'm saying that is a product of our time. In 1959. Sorry, what did I say about that? The formation of DATS in 1959 was a product of our time. The war in Europe had come to an end, and we were looking to develop a business that was based on the design concept, because that is the beginning of all things. Without design, we don't make anything, we don't build anything. And on that basis, I felt, because I was ex-engineering qualified, that this was the line of country I should be looking at. And the need for a more flexible service to industry was very important, as everything was packaged to a 40-hour week in those days, that we felt there was opportunities galore. The circumstances that I went into business for really was to capitalize on that situation. My apprenticeship when I started in 1951 was basically a few years after the war, and under the Marshall Plan, which was designed by the various winners, if you can call them that, during the war. That is America, Britain, and Russia decided on allowing the losers, the Japanese and the Germans, to come into Britain and America to look at industry and take from it the knowledges that they had to rebuild their industries. I mean, today it's looked upon as professional indemnity, that was just never likely to occur in today's world. Even though after experiences we've had in the 70s in America, they look upon sorry, I'm going to have to break off that. I've got that wrong about professional indemnity. It's to do with sorry,
no problem. Just have a look for your notes.
No, I just intellectual property rights. That's the word I was looking for. I got it wrong. But no, the importance today, where intellectual property rights are the key to a country's know-how, is prided by everyone, and is safeguarded under legal requirements. But as I say, when we were in the States in the 70s, we thought nothing of it than to exploit that kind of thing. I remember one particular requirement was for Nippon technology in the iron steel industry, and the Americans in the 70s hadn't got any knowledge of it at all. And to our foolishness, we actually went away and passed that information on, quite in an ignorant way. As I say, today, the Chinese are trying to do it through companies in this country going bust, and they take that technology back to China and develop it. The other thing is by doing it through a manpower recruitment thing. We see it now if you pick up the various car magazines of the design engineers that are now being attracted into China, and they take this knowledge, mental knowledge, and are able to give that to the development of the car industry in China. And probably in 20 years, we're going to be careful that we don't have a car industry.
Just in a couple of sentences, what would you say your initial vision for DATS was when you set up the company?
Well, it was basically to help with a recruitment of specialist skills in the design field, because as a design engineer with ICI in the early days, when I groomed away from the apprenticeship, I felt there was such a call by the expansion at that time by British industry that there was a definite need for an outside body or outside bodies to help with industry throughout that time. I mean, I was working at ICI and could see all the gaps that were necessary and felt that an outside body was required. The problem is finance. If you go on your own, and particularly in those days, raising capital was very difficult. We had interest rates at 14% and numbers like that there's no way that you could ever begin unless it was a creep and crawl process. And I came up with all kinds of ways of making sure once I went into business that we could attract people to pay quickly. So the formation, I even went down from paying people weekly to fortnightly, which nobody really liked. We tried to get it to a monthly system, but nobody liked that either, even that was even worse. But cash flow was a very, very important thing when you're running a business. And our development over this period has been really tremendous. I really don't want to emphasize it more than that, because our involvement with projects such as the 20-ton maintenance flask facility at Sellafield was a major project. It was cost for our client, it was in the 20 million region. We also did the first fire pack unit, which was built for Brown and Root for Occidental when the Ecofist explosion occurred in the North Sea. That was a marvellous breakthrough because this was then sold as a package to the various shipping lines and the rig operators, so that they could put these packs on the back of any little trawler and fire away with their extinguishing systems. So that was a big breakthrough. Unfortunately, we didn't keep the copyright for that. We passed it on to Kerr and Sons, which are a firefighting unit. Our involvement in copyright was never really our main theme, which when I look back, it can be a very lucrative side of the business. But really, we were not, I wasn't concerned about copyright, to be perfectly honest. It's keeping my teams together, keeping people employed, making sure the job flow and the workflow was there. And my recruitment team were also very busy. I suppose in those days it was far easier to get qualified people than it is today, because like everything else, there are more people doing it. We've got to be the best at it if we want to succeed and continue to succeed. Now, that's very important for us. But design is a very, very important thing. I mean, everything, as I said in my earlier chat, was that design is so important that it decides on the whole future of a company's, if they're into product design and product involvement, particularly in the engineering business. Having a good design team, whether it's from a consultancy that you've used for many years, that use the similar team before, like we all get to a point of retirement, then they're, I'm going off track now, aren't I? Sorry about that. I'm breaking.
Just let it flow. You let it flow. Lindsay's going to cue you up with some different things anyway.
No,
Why don't you tell us about some of the things that you're most proud of, or some greatest achievements of DAX. Could you talk about?
Well, staying alive is one of the best achievements we have.
Where was the first building? Is this the original?
No, our first building was in the corner.
Can I just get you to lean back? The sun's just going to shine there. Perfect.
Yeah,
Thank you very much.
Yeah. No, we first started in Liverpool, rather strangely, on the basis that there was an office for rent, and you've got to decide on how you spend your small amounts of savings, because basically it's one's savings that's going into it. And as I said before, the interest rate factor was always another critical point. But after a couple of years, it was decided that really it was in the wrong place for industry. If we were going to assist industry, we had to be in the centre of things. Manchester, in my view, was not the right place, and Warrington became a very great centre of attraction. One of our first projects was involved in the area of Widnes. We picked up a big contract with Metal Box in Speke in Liverpool. We did a lot of work for BICC with Balfour Beatty's project arm on the electrification systems throughout the country at that time. We've been very active in the 60s and 70s on projects with BNFL. We were first introduced to the Atomic Energy Authority in 1968, we found very, very difficult to persuade them that we, as an outside body, were able to help them. Indeed, I spent nearly the great part between 66 and 68 in persuading them that we could help them in various areas. And all of a sudden, the project, we call it Project Fear today, but now in those days, the project in Dounreay was the fast breeder reactor, which they persuaded the government to invest in as a means of producing more fuel from the process. So in fact, it fed itself and was a continuation fuel maker. I think the theory finally was decided on that it was not for them. And one of the things that decided Mrs. Thatcher to close the project was that there was an explosion there. And as an ex-apprentice in the chemical industry, one thing we were very well aware of, as I was, never ever to mix sodium with water. And apparently the explosion occurred on the site at Dounreay when somebody had put disposable radioactive clothing, which had been outside in one of their vats. And literally one day it rained and there was this massive explosion, and that was the final death knell for that site. So the process all came to an end, unfortunately. We were involved with British Aerospace in the early days, but as times became more competitive, our slow process with the industry was ended. Sorry, am I? Oh, I thought you were trying to track my channel. The process with British Aerospace ended rather surprisingly, and again, there's more into it than for the reasons why it ended. They required us to invest in their systems at the time called Anvil, and they were charging us £100,000 for the licenses for this process. So to get the contract, you have to invest in the system. And after a year, they decided to change the Anvil system to another computer system. And I refused to accept the liability for changing. And they said, well, to my management, not to me direct, that if you don't invest in the CATIA system, then the contract with us will be ended. And I had to make a decision, a financial decision, and I decided, because we were busy in the chemical and the nuclear and other streams of business, that it was something I wasn't prepared to risk again. When you've been bitten once, you tend to think about it again, seriously. So we didn't do it, and hence our link with the aerospace industry came to a halt. Going on, where am I?
Well, why don't you tell us about some of your, obviously there's a lot of them, but some of your fondest memories of DATS over the years?
What do you mean? Sorry.
So some highlights of DATS over the years.
Well, the highlights, I think, were the firefighting pack, which we didn't get the intellectual property rights to. That was given to Kerrs. In a lot of these things, you're disappointed at what you do. I mean, everything in life one can be pleased about. I remember one of the big losers, because we'd invested in various individuals' ideas. We were always looking for ideas to develop as a key to widening our appeal to industry. And some of them were ideas we invested in, and they really weren't successful. One, just incidentally, was a washing machine, clothes washing machine, that was operated without a motive system where the drum went round. It was to do with pressurized air. And we spent 2 years investing in this project until we kept hitting brick walls, and I pulled the plug on it. I decided that we'd spent too much already. There was no way that this project was going to work. And from what I look back at, people like Bosch and the other big design companies in that area have never gone that route. They've always gone to the moving drum. I suppose if one looks at mistakes, the biggest mistake in business was made when I had a very, very quick conversation with my chief engineer, project engineer at the time, a man called, shall I mention his name, Jeff Briley. Jeff was an ex-atomic energy engineer, but was very good at managing design projects. And he came to me one day with an idea about putting sensors on cars, which bleeped when you got near another vehicle. And I said, what a rubbish idea. I said, nobody ever would want to have one of those on their vehicles. Why have you come up with that? He said, well, we've got a very, very smart engineer working for us. And he's come up with this thing, and he's got some prototypes already working, but he needs a partner to invest in, to develop it. And I blankly refused. It was the biggest mistake in business I ever made. Because if we'd patented that, that would have been a big breakthrough for us on the income stream. But we've stayed where we are. We've not really developed and grown very much, but we're a very sound business. And I think people should understand that we don't let them down deliberately. If things happen, they happen because of circumstances outside of our control, such as what we're seeing at the moment, and the uncertainty about whether we come in Europe or we stay in Europe or we go out of Europe. These are the things that affect us. Taxation is another thing. we've been promised that once we leave Europe, taxation would be reduced. Well, that would be great. Whether the markets will shrink is another matter. So you may be given a double whammy. You may be promised in one hand lower taxation, but in there you lose your markets. But I think the business that we've done overseas is not been mainly in Europe, so we really, as a company, we're not going to suffer very much. So I'm not too worried about what happens there. My concern, when I'm not going on to a political thing now, but my concern is, when does the levelling up process stop? Because I've been to Europe many times. I've been a regular visitor to parts of Europe, and I think their living standards are a lot better than ours. So I think in many ways they've passed us, certainly when it comes to quality roads and transport and so on. But that's my personal view, of not a political position.
Definitely.
Just such a area of
We can't decide for the politicians where we go from there. With the company, the country's already decided on which way it wants to go. Whether it will finally get finished there is another matter.
Yeah. What would you wish for DATS moving forwards?
I would like us to continue to develop. I would like us to continue to offer our clients a wider service connected with the field that we're in. I'd like to see people who we rely on stay with us, because that's important for continuity. There's so much opportunity in the engineering field. I mean, as I've said before, the process that goes into food manufacture, or whether it's in farming, or whether it's in horticulture of any kind, whether it's in the chemical process or the nuclear process, engineering design is the key to the whole beginning of any development. We see it in the car industry, how we've come away from a simple petrol engine to a diesel engine to now, of course, we're electrifying the car. And that is a continuous process of development and evolution that I'd like to see that we are going to be part of it. I mean, I'm now at the age when I won't probably see the no diesel and no petrol cars on the road, but I think for the future of the environment, the development of this is so important for the environmentalists and for ourselves as a living being on this planet. We probably some ways I'm disappointed we're not involved in the car industry anymore. We did a lot of work with Fords in the 70s at Halewood on their gearboxes and the development of the automatic section of a car. We never got involved in the body design, but we did get involved in the internals of it. And I used to like going down to Fords, to be perfectly honest, Halewood, because it was an opportunity to see what was going on the development side. It was an insight before any models were introduced. Again, we've been involved in the car industry, the food industry, the chemical industry, the nuclear industry, process industry, with Crossfields just down the road as part of Unilever now. And it's a business that we want to continue to be part of. Chemical links with Laporte's and the old ICI factories are well known, and I would like to feel that those links continue. The big disappointment for us as a company was the sale of ICI to Ineos. And that, I think, killed a lot of our links, unfortunately, because of their change in policy. I find in business that you've got to be straight with people and honest with people. And when you've been dealing with a company like ICI that was very, very straight, very frank, very honest and very straight, I'm not trying to say Ineos isn't, but they changed and virtually upturned the way business was done with them. For instance, they asked everyone to go on a 6-monthly pay structure because of their cash requirements, which we refused. They suggested that people should operate under a 2.5% margin, profit margin gap. And that, again, was not plausible in a business like ours. Cash flow, as I said earlier on, is so important. To try and restrict people to that kind of system was just not acceptable. Again, if I may go back to the 60s, I have actually played on a little bit into the 70s and the 80s. One of the things in the 60s, of course, I haven't mentioned, was our involvement with the glass industry. The glass industry was a very big part of our development in the 60s. It was our first big project. We had 68 people, for instance, working on the new project which Pilkingtons were developing in Scarborough in Canada. And they were developing a factory in Australia. So the design process was very important in those, because it's basically, you can't build a plant without having a plan and a project structure to go with it. So we were very involved for about 4 years on those projects. And it helped us then, through a financial stream, to develop our nuclear involvement. And it's a matter of trying to be the saviour for all intentions, and it's very, very difficult to try and pin us down to one thing, because it's a matter of movements in various industries that we've moved with, whether it's been the chemical, the manufacturing of a process. I mean, the very, very first project was very, very small in 1960, 61. We were asked by a metal box company in Kirby to help them with some flow lines they had on the design. They wanted to change their structure and the conveyor speeds and so on. And we had 3 men working on that project for, probably about a year or 2. But that was the beginning of knowing that there was work out there. There was requirements for our industries. And of course, once we got involved with the larger industrial people, our development took off. And that really is a story in itself. I don't know, as you know, since I retired, I don't know what we've been doing and what industries we've been involved in the last 10 or so years. I shouldn't say 24 years, should I? But it's a long time. But
have you got everything? Do you think? Is there anything you think's missing, Mike?
Something about website where you've got the key dates and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Is there anything?
Milestones.
Yeah. Was there any other big milestones?
well, it was a milestone when we moved from the recruitment and the small design office we had in Warrington. I once, over lunch, said to my right-hand man, if we've got this workflow and we're short of space, why don't we look for something big? and we started to look around for premises that were available. And the only place we could find was in Widnes. And it was a floor, which was a ground floor part of a modern building. And it was with its own car park. It had, I think it had something like 10 or 12,000 square feet. And it was a perfect opportunity to start because we didn't have more than 2,000 square feet in Warrington. So it was a big jump. And we negotiated a deal with the Universal, what was it called now? Great Universal, GUS it was called, Great Universal Stores, and where they had this spare space. And we negotiated a deal and we decided to take the chance and move there. So we had all our equipment made specially to fit in with the layout of that operation. And the main thing then was to make sure we attracted projects. Because the one thing in business you've got to remember, and something we learned very, very quickly, is if we didn't have the facilities, we weren't going to attract the work. It was as simple as the old William Tenn thing about the apple and or the egg, the egg and the, what is it? No, I'm sorry, I'm rambling on. No, the chicken and the egg, isn't it? Chicken and the egg. No, it's the chicken and the egg again, because we are, if you don't have it, then you won't attract it. So we decided on that route, and it did work. And within a period of 5 years, we'd overgrown it. And they decided to double the rent. So we're then looking on the outside for our own building. And I had a meeting one day with a guy that was there. And he said, "I'm surprised you haven't looked at that site in Nolan's Lane." And I said, "What site's that?" He said, "Oh, it's the old remand home." And so we looked at it. It was very dilapidated. And we put two and two together and decided it was worth considering. So we finally decided to invest in it with certain small grants from the government at the time that were on offer. And we went ahead with it, and we spent in excess of £1 million, which was very, very much, we would have thought a few years ago, out of our range. But we decided to do it. The bank were very supportive, and we went ahead with it. And it proved again another great success for us. Unfortunately, in all things, good things very often come to an end, and we lost certain bids through, I don't know whether I should say this on camera, but there was a lot of things that were going on unbeknown to us during the Labour government's administration. I was politically involved with the Labour Party, which I hadn't realised. The Labour Party under Tony Blair and Gordon Brown, was meeting up with another Labour member, and it operated a company called Capita. They were just starting off and trying to develop into taking resource contracts from the government by taking over government departments. And I know there was £1 million changed hands between Capita and the Labour Party. And when people talk about bribery and corruption, that was, to me, the biggest corrupt act I could ever remember. People might say, "Have you proof?" It's been in the newspapers several times, so I think I'm speaking quite within my remit. And it meant that companies like ours, when we were on contract, for instance, at Sellafield, were being earmarked for losing those contracts, even though Capita had no idea what engineering capabilities were. And slowly that contract was severed from us overnight. Well, we were given 4 weeks' notice. And the company had to make a decision. Did it stay where it was without the income streams? Or did it decide to contract? And the development of Widnes then came to an end, and we came back rather strangely to Warrington, where we have a nice knit unit which can offer its clients the same business but more expertise and more experience. And I think that in itself is very important. Sorry about making this thing about Capita, but it's I wouldn't have mentioned it had not been in the newspaper. I've got the newspaper cuttings of it.
Yeah, that's fine. It's weird. I just did an interview last week with the CEO of Capita.
Yeah, did you? Oh, God.
The new guy.
Yeah. Well, as a matter of fact, the guy that I'm talking about, and I can't just remember his name because I didn't think I was going to require it today, because I've got the cutting at home. Retired with 130 million. So that's what he did, and so the £1 million he invested in the Labour Party. I therefore retired from the Labour Party and gave my card in as in disgust. And anybody that's in the Labour Party or in the Conservative Party or in the Liberal Party, don't believe a bloody word they say. Excuse my language.
No. I'm learning this fast about politics. I'm learning it fast.
Don't believe it. Don't believe a word they say.
That takes us straight over to Stephen.
Yeah, so that fits.
That's perfect.
Yeah.
That was very interesting.
One thing that's very important is I always think that when a government denies something, you can guarantee that's what it's going to be.
Yeah. Do you want a happy birthday dance?
Not today. We're going to get on a different day.
You can do it now.
I'm sorry, I've not had it. I didn't. Oh, I'm awfully sorry. I've been.
We'll do it on the day.
I've been. Look at this. I've been talking. I'm very dry. I haven't had my drink. I should have had this in between.
So we just go back the day. Do it. We'll do them all on that day.
No, what gets me with companies like Capita is a breed of a company that's basically operating government contracts.
Well, yeah,
They didn't recruit anybody.
Yeah.
All they recruited were the senior people to manage those departments.